So you remember the Freedom Convoy that brought a bunch of Canadians, truckers, nurses, doctors, cab workers, a bunch of working class people got together to rally against the authoritarianism of the Trudeau government and the Liberal Party that was completely ignoring the actual science of the virus and complying with big pharmaceuticals and complying with tyrannicalness of overextending their government powers. And then they use the Emergencies Powers Act, which is something no government really ever uses unless in case of war, and they used it against their own people. And Trudeau knew about this. He knew that this was something that was going to be controversial. He knew that this was an attack demonizing his own citizens, but he continued to follow through on it. And then when the truckers wanted to have a talk with him, he mysteriously got COVID all of a sudden. Just out of the blue, just decide, I have COVID. I have to isolate. I have to get away from the protesters that just want to approach me and have a rational discussion. And these were just truckers that Trudeau praised at one point for, being hard essential workers, that they were stocking the shelves as things were shutting down. They were the holier grails of the working class society of Canada, and they were doing amazing work. They hailed them once. And then they realized and woke up and started thinking about complying with big pharmaceuticals and think, wait a second, things are not adding up. And then all hell broke loose. So it's crazy beyond belief. So I just want to rehash what Trudeau said at the moment when the convoy happened, because this happened back in February. We're now into November, almost the end of the year. And they're just starting to do trials. They're starting to do litigations to find out the Emergencies Powers Act was unlawful and unethical against Canadians. And, they're holding this in court attempt. They had Chrystia Freeland testify, and Trudeau also testified. But let me show you what he said back when this started, and just how crazy and cringeworthy and dictatorship-like this really gotten to. So this is what he said during the convoy to ordinary Canadians.
Canadians have stepped up to do the right thing to protect the freedoms and the rights of Canadians to get back to the things we love to do. We know the way through this pandemic is by getting everyone vaccinated. And the overwhelming majority, close to 90% of Canadians, have done exactly that. The small fringe minority of people who are on their way to Ottawa or who are holding unacceptable views that they're expressing.
Unacceptable views. He's saying this to Canadian citizens, the people that he's supposed to be representing. He's saying it to his own people. You have unacceptable views. He's saying this to Canadians. That is something a tyrant, that is something a fascist, a dictator would say out in the open. That you are coming to my territory with unacceptable views. You have unacceptable thoughts to be here in Canada. This fringe minority. But then you just applauded Canada for 90% vaccinations. And somehow the only way to restore freedoms of Canada is to restrict people's freedoms of bodily autonomy and not being compliant with the most corrupted pharmaceutical industries known to mankind. The only way to get freedom back is to get rid of freedom, apparently, in this backward society. At least that's the twisted logic of the Liberal Party and Trudeau and Joe Biden and the Democrats. That's apparently the twisted logic. In order to have freedom, you got to get rid of it first. And these were people that got together to make some noise, and they were scared by it because it was not just truckers, it was not just a fringe minority. It got all sorts of people to gather together to realize that they were being corrupted by this tyrant with unacceptable views.
Do not represent the views of Canadians who have been there for each other, who know that following the science and stepping up to protect each other is the best way to continue to ensure our freedoms, our rights, our values as a country.
So, vaccinations are going to protect us for freedoms? That doesn't very sound scientific there, Mr. Trudeau. So apparently you got to get jabbed to restore freedoms. You have to comply to pharmaceuticals. You have to comply to the corporate state and the government atrocity, the government authoritarianism, which is by definition fascism. You got to comply to fascism to prevent it and restore your freedoms. I think anyone can understand how crazy a conundrum that is. And even he knows that. Even he knows that. But he's going to blurt out in the open to ordinary Canadians that you have unacceptable views, you're a fringe minority, and we got to do something about it. And it wasn't just that. It got even worse because Trudeau could have just walked away, but then he had to double down. And we've shown this before. So this is when he was doing a French talk show talking about the fringe minority, you know, all the truckers that he praised for doing such a great job being essential workers that now are demonized and continue to be demonized because they're not compliant with the corporate estate. They're not compliant with the tyrannicalness of the government and compliance of the corporate estate aligning itself together. They're not compliant with fascism, which is the definition of fascism, when the government and corporate estate align itself each other to demonize working citizens. And this is what he said openly in a talk show.
Oui, on va s'en sortir de cette pandémie par la vaccination.
So he says, we will end this pandemic with vaccination, which is not true, not scientifically proven whatsoever. We all know folks that are hesitant. We'll continue to try to convince them, but there are also folks that are fiercely opposed to vaccination. They're extreme. So the host asks, are they extremists? And he says they don't believe in science. They're often misogynistic, often racist also. It's a small group that takes up space. So now we have to make a choice. As a leader, as a country, do we tolerate these people? That is what Justin Trudeau is saying to his own citizens. Do we tolerate these people? Do we accept them into our country? Again, this is stuff you would read in German history books during the times of Nazi-controlled occupied Germany, in Stalin and Mussolini. Do we tolerate our regular citizens that have different viewpoints, that are maybe thinking outside the box? You know, remember when thinking was a thing? Do we tolerate those people? That is what your prime minister is saying to you. Should you be tolerated and accepted into Canadian society because you're outside the box? You're outside the norms. Or do we say enough? The majority of people, almost 80% of Quebecers, did what needed to be done. They got vaccinated. We need to return things we like doing. It's not those folks that will block us. That is what a confused tyrant would say. That is not someone who is scientific. That is not someone who is able to examine and question the science, which is what science is. You're supposed to question the data. You're supposed to research and gather evidence and have different analysis and have a second opinion. That's the whole point of the evolution of science. And this sounds like someone who was bought and paid for by Pfizer or Moderna or whoever to push an agenda. That we have to demonize a portion of our population to comply with the pharmaceutical state. And he's asking, should we tolerate these people? And apparently he didn't take it well. Because not only did he say they were misogynistic and racist and thrown every words on the bus, but he actually physically harmed them by removing their bank accounts. This is Trudeau saying Canada will freeze the bank accounts of Freedom Convoy truckers who continue their anti-vaccine mandate blockades. You just said that 90% of the truckers are vaccinated. So clearly they're not anti-vaccine. But they are anti-mandate. They are anti-lockdown. They are anti-surveillance state. Which, if you saw the Tucker Carlson clip that we showed you multiple times, one of the protesters, the lead organizer of the convoy, said that this is turning into a surveillance Orwellian nightmare state. That him crossing the border is now allowing COVID and ArriveCam to spy on ordinary citizens in our country. That we're allowing this to happen on the front of COVID. And now we're allowing bank accounts to be terminated. The government's now deciding your finances, deciding where you can go, the passport system, the digital IDs, all the commercials that were coming in. The head of the Bankers Association of Canada was cheerleading and proudly up front for it. That we need digital IDs, we need passports, we need surveillance, we need to make sure we monitor every single Canadian, their actions, their thoughts, their ideas, their posts, their what they're buying, where they're buying it from, what transactions they're doing on their bank accounts. So it got worse and worse and worse and worse. And that's why people had enough, and that's why this thing started. That's why people got together. And this is back in February. So now we're into November. We're getting into the trials now, and Justin Trudeau is called to testify. By the way, he also did this. Just to also point out, Trudeau compares Canadian truckers at a Freedom Convoy protest to Nazis and racists. That is your leader, your head of state, telling ordinary Canadians that they're a bunch of Nazis and racists for organizing together, peacefully protesting against mandates. Apparently, protesting against fascism makes you a Nazi. That's how backwards, upside down, bought out, cringe this is. That you protesting against actual fascism, which is the corporate state aligning itself with authoritarian government to oppress you, makes you a Nazi in his eyes. But now he's called to testify. So watch him after months and months and months and months of articles, investigations, and things have been out in the open. Now he's going to lie once again out in the open in his testimonial, in him testifying on why he invoked the Emergencies Powers Act, which is something unheard of that no politician has ever done unless in case of war. But he did it and managed to get away with it for so long, and now he's called to the helm. And watch him lie his ass off out in the open because of it.
What if I don't sign it? What if I say, okay, we now have advice from the Professional Public Service to invoke a public order emergency. And I decide, you know what? Let's give it a few days. Where the professional public service had made a determination that the thresholds were met, that the use of it was appropriate and, responsible, and the measures were the right ones that we were going to put in it. And I said, no, you know what? Let's wait and see another few days, another week to see if we really need to do it. First of all, what if the worst had happened in those following days? What if someone had gotten hurt? What if a police officer had been put in a hospital? What if...
By the way, none of that ever happened. None of it ever happened. They were even trying to determine whether there was property damage. None of that happened. They're accusing the protesters for doing unspeakable things against the city of Ottawa. None of that ever happened. The police have no evidence, no factual claims. And considering Ottawa's a huge metropolitan area with a bunch of security cameras, no video evidence of any property damage. So this is just more fear-mongering. This is just him lying and fear-mongering to people that gathering together to be against mandates, to be against the corruption, to be against the authoritarian reigns of this guy here makes you a criminal.
When I had an opportunity to do something, I had waited, and we had the unthinkable happen over the coming days, even though there was all this warning that it was possibly coming. I would have warned that in a way that we would certainly be talking about in a forum such as this. But more than that.
Yeah, we would have sat down and actually talk about this, but then all of a sudden, in a coincidence, I just miraculously had COVID. So I had to hide away over in my cottage there, and I had to get away from work because these guys were coming, and I couldn't actually meet with them or do a Zoom call because I was trying to isolate myself. But I had so much time and knowledge about these people coming together because I know the mandates are terrible, but I couldn't get to talk to them. I had no opportunity to do so. And no opportunity to do so now. He has not said a word to any of the truckers in almost a year. Almost a year. Not a single word to those people. Not a single one. He just doesn't have the time, apparently.
The responsibility of a prime minister is to make the tough calls and keep people safe.
The responsibility of the prime minister, the responsibility of any leader, is supposed to represent the country and its people. And considering you've oppressed people, considering the lockdowns and the mandates, the damage that has not only physically done to people, but also psychologically done to people, because there are now reports coming out that depression, suicide rates, alcoholism has skyrocketed in the past few years than it's been in decades. More people are on antidepressants in the last couple of years than they were back in 2000s or 1990s. And the fact that you've oppressed people to the point, to the brink, to the extreme that they had to step up, they had to get together, and you call them every word in the book, you try to throw them under the bus, you try to freeze their bank accounts so they couldn't have really access outside of the protest. So even if they wanted to get coffee or groceries, you would freeze their bank accounts because somehow they're associated with the unacceptable thoughts of people, because they might be thinking things. And what you did was not the act of a prime minister. What you did was the act of a coward. You were a complete, utter, useless coward at a situation. And during this whole entire pandemic, we've seen how much of a useless coward you are. Because a real prime minister would have looked at the data, looked at the analysis, maybe read your own reports that McMaster University was pointing out, They were about to get their own COVID vaccine rolling until Fauci came in and destroyed that. And other universities from Toronto, Vancouver, the University of British Columbia, Alberta, they were doing scientific analysis on this virus that he clearly did not pay attention to. Like, everything was out front and out in the open. But his simple solution was, hey, let's lock everything down. Let's mandate people to get this experimental vaccine inside of them without any data analysis or evidence to back those claims. And we'll just roll with it. And anyone that goes against that is deemed a criminal, a Nazi. We got to take away their assets, their bank accounts. They have to be demonized away from society. The amount of damage that causes to people, and the amount that escalates into now ordinary life, because look at all the people on Twitter that are still trying to demonize the anti-vax, trying to demonize people. Hey, you got to be kicked out of society. Those people should not be allowed to have food. Some people said, including Noam Chomsky, one of the most brilliant political minds imaginable, said that the anti-vaxxers don't deserve to have basic needs of survival because of their fringe thoughts and ideas. What does that say? What does that say? And this guy has no idea what the hell he's doing to himself and doing to the country. And he just admittedly lied right in testimony after all the months, after all the exposés, lied out in the open. And I also don't have the clip here, but I wish I had that. Right after he said this, the prosecutor asked Trudeau, did you call these people misogynistic or racist? He was asked that. Trudeau said no. Trudeau said no. Oh, no. We value these Canadians, and came up with some, BS rhetoric to try to back the fact that he still cares about people. Even though months and months on end, we just showed you 2 clips there. That's why I wanted to show you those 2 clips beforehand. That he demonized ordinary Canadians. And now he's lying in testimony. He's lying in a testifying court battle where he invoked a unethical and basically illegal act of authoritarianism against people of Canada. That is that's the face of a tyrant, not the face of a prime minister that's supposed to represent you and care about your safety. Do you think any of this really cared about your safety? Because where was the actual safe part in all this? That you're heisting people's bank accounts, that you're demonizing them, that you're getting people to propagandize one another and manipulate each other, and demonizing your friends and families and neighbors. Like I said, the physical and psychological damage, this all has played out. And that's what you're saying. And that's your conclusion to all this. Time will tell, but we already know. He is a useless, complete, sociopathic liar. And a tyrant to the establishment, and a tyrant to the pharmaceutical industry. And just oppressing the ordinary people of Canada.